Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes. What happens when one of entertainment's most legendary icons sits down with daytime television's most notorious panel and everything goes catastrophically wrong? When decades of pent-up industry frustrations collide with calculated ambush journalism on live national television, what you're about to witness is the most explosive confrontation in talk show history. A moment when a true legend reminded the world exactly why she earned that title and why some battles are worth fighting no matter the cost. This is the story of Cher versus The View, and it's a clash that will be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years to come. The morning started like any other at the studio of The View, the daytime talk show that had built its reputation on sharp political commentary and celebrity interviews that occasionally drew blood. The production crew moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting lighting, testing microphones, running through the standard pre-show checklist. In the green room, makeup artists put finishing touches on the 5 hosts who would soon take their positions behind the iconic curved desk that had become synonymous with heated debate and viral moments. But this wasn't going to be just another show. This was going to be historic. Cher was scheduled to appear in the second segment, a promotional stop for her new memoir, Unfiltered 5 Decades of Truth. At 68 years old, Cher remained an absolute force in the entertainment industry. With over 100 million records sold worldwide, an Oscar, multiple Grammys, and a career spanning 5 decades, she had transcended the title of celebrity to become something far more rare. A living legend who had survived every attempt to silence her, sideline her, or break her spirit. Those who knew Cher understood she was not someone to be trifled with. She had fought battles that would have destroyed lesser artists, blacklisting in the 70s for her political activism, vicious media attacks on her appearance and personal life, industry sexism that tried to push her aside the moment she turned 30, and death threats for her outspoken support of LGBTQ rights when it was genuinely dangerous to do so. She had stared down powerful men, corrupt systems, and cultural prejudice, and she had won every single time. But The View hosts, it seemed, had either forgotten this history or believed they were somehow exempt from it. Joy Behar, the sharp, tongued lead host known for her biting commentary, had been unusually quiet during the morning production meeting. Those who worked closely with her recognized the signs she was planning something, waiting for her moment. Whoopi Goldberg, the show's anchor and voice of supposed reason, seemed distracted, her usual warmth replaced by something harder to read. Sonani hosts Sarah Haynes and Anna Navarro, the remaining panel members, exchanged knowing glances that suggested today's interview had been more carefully orchestrated than usual. The trap was being set, though Cher had no idea. As she arrived at the studio, gracious and professional as always, she swept onto the set to warm applause from the studio audience, her presence commanding attention the moment she appeared. Cher wore a sleek black blazer over a silver top, her signature long hair falling past her shoulders, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had walked onto thousands of stages and never once doubted she belonged there. The hosts stood to greet her, their smiles bright and practiced, their handshakes firm. To the casual observer, everything seemed perfectly normal. But cameras don't lie, and the footage would later reveal the subtle tells. The way Joy's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the tension in Sonny's shoulders, the calculating look Anna shot toward the control room. They were predators circling, and Cher had just walked into their carefully prepared ambush. The opening minutes proceeded smoothly enough. Whoopi guided the conversation through safe territory, compliments about Cher's enduring career, questions about her memoir, softball inquiries about her recent tour. Cher responded with practiced grace, her answers thoughtful and engaging, occasionally drawing genuine laughter from the audience. She was doing what she had done 10,000 times before, promoting her work, connecting with fans, being the consummate professional. Little did she know, those who recognized the warning signs were already shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then Joy Behar leaned forward and the temperature in the studio began to drop. "So Cher, you've been in this business for over 5 decades, Joy began, her tone carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. You've seen tremendous changes in the entertainment industry. Tell us, how exactly have you managed to stay relevant all these years?" The word hung in the air like a challenge. Relevant, not successful, not influential, not legendary. Relevant, the term used to dismiss, to diminish, to suggest that someone's time had passed, and they were desperately clinging to past glory. Cher's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. Her smile remained in place, but something dangerous flickered behind it. Anyone who had followed her career recognized that look. It was the same expression she wore in 1975 when an interviewer asked if she was too old to be sexy at 32. It was the look that preceded legendary moments. While Joy Cher replied, her voice steady but edged with steel. "I think staying authentic has been key. I've never needed to manufacture drama or controversy for attention. My work has always spoken for itself." The cameras caught it, the quick exchange of glances between the hosts. Whoopi shifted in her chair, discomfort visible in the set of her shoulders. Sarah forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Sonny leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Anna's jaw tightened and her hand moved toward her notes, as if preparing for the next strike. The trap had been sprung, and now they were going to spring the real attack. Anna Navarro, filling in as the fifth host and clearly eager to make an impression, decided to escalate immediately. That's interesting, Cher, because some people might say your recent social media activity has been quite controversial. You've been extremely vocal about certain political figures, haven't you? The air in the studio seemed to chill by degrees. Camera operators adjusted their positions, sensing something significant was unfolding. In the control room, producers leaned closer to their monitors. Suddenly alert, the studio audience, which had been comfortably settled in for a pleasant celebrity interview, began to sense the shift in atmosphere, that electric charge that comes before a storm breaks. Cher straightened in her chair, her posture becoming more formal, more guarded. Those who knew her recognized the warning signs, the slight tilt of her head, the way her hands moved from relaxed in her lap to gripping the arms of her chair, the dangerous calm settling over her features like armor being donned for battle. I've always used my platform to speak up for what I believe in, Cher answered, her voice firm but controlled. If that makes some people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine. It was a clear boundary being drawn, a warning shot across the bow. But the View hosts, emboldened by their numbers and perhaps underestimating exactly who they were dealing with, pressed forward. Joy leaned in closer, her politeness slipping like a mask coming loose. But don't you think celebrities should stick to entertaining and leave politics to the politicians? I mean, what qualifies you to speak on complex policy issues? The condescension was unmistakable now. The implication was clear: stay in your lane, shut up and sing, you're just an entertainer. It was the same dismissive attitude Cher had been fighting against for 50 years, the same attempt to silence women who dared to have opinions beyond their designated roles. Cher felt the familiar fire rising in her chest, the same fury that had fueled every fight she'd ever won. She had heard this argument from presidents, from industry executives, from journalists far more accomplished than Joy Behar. And she had never, not once, backed down. That's rich, Cher shot back, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade, coming from a show that's literally built on political commentary. I guess it's only acceptable when the viewpoints match yours. Is that it? The audience gasped audibly. This was no longer a friendly interview. This was open combat, and Cher had just fired back with precision targeting. The host exchanged panicked glances, suddenly realizing they might have miscalculated. Whoopi Goldberg, perhaps sensing the situation slipping out of control, tried to interject with her trademark maternal authority. Now Cher, we're just trying to have a conversation here. There's no need to get defensive. The word defensive was carefully chosen, another attempt to frame Cher as emotional, unreasonable, overreacting. It was a classic tactic, one used to dismiss women's legitimate anger for centuries. Cher's eyes flashed. Are we having a conversation? Because it feels more like an interrogation designed to make me look bad. The coordinated attack is pretty obvious from where I'm sitting. The truth, spoken plainly and without apology, landed like a bomb in the middle of the set. The host's carefully constructed facade of innocent questioning shattered. Sarah Haynes, sweat visible on her forehead under the hot studio lights, tried to salvage the situation by changing tactics. Well, speaking of looking bad, Sarah said, attempting to sound casual but coming across as cruel, there have been some rumors circulating about your personal life lately. Care to address those for our viewers? The studio fell into dead silence. It was the crossing of a line, the moment when this went from hostile interview to character assassination. Personal attacks masquerading as journalism, unsubstantiated gossip dressed up as legitimate questioning. And Cher, who had come to promote her memoir and share her life story on her own terms, suddenly understood with crystal clarity that she had been ambushed. Her face, captured in perfect clarity by 3 different cameras, went through a transformation that would be analyzed frame by frame in the days to come. Hurt flickered across her features. First the pain of betrayal, of being invited as a guest only to be treated as a target. Then confusion, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. And finally settling like a storm cloud, fury unlike anything The View had ever witnessed. Excuse me. Cher's voice was dangerously calm, each word enunciated with perfect clarity. What exactly are you implying, Sarah? But Sarah, emboldened by what she perceived as support from her co-hosts, pressed the attack. Tsunami host jumped in, her voice dripping with false concern. We're just saying that for someone who preaches authenticity, there seem to be some questions about your private relationships and business dealings. Don't you think your fans deserve transparency? The accusation hung in the air like poison gas spreading through the studio. Cher felt decades of media manipulation, invasive scrutiny, and personal attacks crystallize into a single moment of pure rage. They had invited her here, smiled to her face, and then attempted to destroy her credibility on national television using unnamed sources and vague insinuations. The mask of professionalism maintained through 50 years of hostile interviews and media ambushes began to crack. You want to talk about authenticity? Cher's voice rose, her legendary composure finally breaking under the sustained assault. Let's talk about a show that pretends to support women while tearing them down on national television. Let's talk about that kind of authenticity. The hosts scrambled to maintain their composure, but cracks were appearing in their united front. Anna's face wrinkled, her righteous indignation looking less convincing by the second. Joy's mouth tightened into a thin line, her sharp wit momentarily failing her. Whoopi's defense sounded weak even to her own ears as she tried to regain control. "We're not tearing anyone down, Cher," Whoopi protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're asking legitimate questions that our viewers want answered." Cher laughed, and it was a bitter sound that sent chills through everyone in the studio. Legitimate questions. You call spreading unsubstantiated rumors and questioning my integrity legitimate journalism? This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that's destroying meaningful discourse in this country. The studio atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Camera operators adjusted their positions, instinctively zooming in to capture every nuance of the confrontation unfolding before them. Sound engineers frantically adjusted levels as voices rose. In the control room, producers sat frozen, simultaneously horrified and thrilled, knowing they were witnessing television history in the making. The kind of viral moment that would be replayed millions of times. The confrontation had reached a critical threshold, but neither side was willing to back down, and Cher was just getting started. Joy Behar, perhaps feeling her authority challenged and needing to reassert control, made what would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation. She leaned back in her chair, adopted a condescending tone that she likely thought conveyed worldly wisdom, and delivered what she believed would be the knockout blow. "Look, Cher, we understand you're passionate about your beliefs, but maybe it's time to accept that your moment has passed. The industry has moved on. Perhaps it's time you did too." The words hit Cher like a physical blow, like being punched in the stomach after already being knocked down. It was every dismissal she'd ever received rolled into one devastating statement. Too old, irrelevant, past your prime. The same words that had been used to try to silence her at 30, at 40, at 50, now being wielded as weapons at 68. After 5 decades of being told she was too much, too outspoken, too controversial, too old, too opinionated, too everything, she reached her breaking point. The transformation was visible to every camera, every witness. Her hands, which had been gripping the chair arms, released. Her posture, which had been defensive, straightened. Her face, which had shown hurt and anger, settled into something far more dangerous. Absolute clarity of purpose. The mask of professionalism didn't just slip, it was deliberately removed, revealing the fighter who had survived everything the entertainment industry could throw at her. "My moment has passed," Cher's voice trembled. But not with weakness, with barely contained fury that had been building for 50 years. "My moment has passed. I've been breaking barriers and fighting battles while you were still figuring out how to read a teleprompter without sounding like robots." The hosts visibly recoiled as if slapped. The raw power in Cher's voice, honed by decades of filling stadiums and commanding audiences of tens of thousands, filled every corner of the studio. It wasn't just volume. It was presence, authority, the kind of force that can't be manufactured or faked. "I was selling out arenas before any of you were even born," Cher continued, her voice rising with each word. "I was using my platform to fight for civil rights when it was dangerous. I was standing up for LGBTQ equality when it cost me contracts and money and safety. I was speaking truth to power when power could actually destroy careers. And you think your little daytime talk show gives you the right to tell me my moment has passed?" Joy tried to interrupt to regain some control, but Cher wasn't finished, not even close. "Don't you dare!" Cher cut her off, standing now towering over the desk and the hosts cowering behind it. "Don't you dare try to silence me now. I've earned the right to speak. I've paid for it with decades of fighting people exactly like you." The studio was in complete chaos. Security personnel at the edges of the set shifted nervously, unsure if they should intervene. Camera operators continued filming, knowing they were capturing something extraordinary. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, some with mouths literally hanging open. And the hosts of The View, who had started this interview thinking they could control and manipulate a legend, suddenly realized they had severely miscalculated. Sarah Haynes, her voice shaking with stress and perhaps genuine regret, tried to de-escalate. "Sure, I think we're all getting a little heated here. Maybe we should take a breath." "Then don't you dare tell me to take a breath." Cher's voice was like ice, each word sharp enough to cut. "You want to sit there and question my relevance, my integrity, spread lies about my personal life, and then tell me to calm down. Let me tell you about relevance, sweetheart. I was selling out Madison Square Garden before you learned to walk, and I'll be performing long after this pathetic excuse for journalism is forgotten." Ana Navarro, her face contorted with indignation and perhaps fear, made the mistake of trying to assert professional dignity. "There's no need to get personal, Cher. We're professionals here." The laugh that escaped Cher's lips was sharp, bitter, and utterly devastating. "Professionals? You call this professional, ambushing a guest with manufactured controversies and thinly veiled insults? You wouldn't know professionalism if it walked up and introduced itself." The crude dismissal sent shock waves through everyone present. The View had certainly seen heated exchanges before, arguments about politics, policy, culture wars, but nothing like this. This was a legend systematically dismantling the credibility of an entire institution and doing it with the kind of righteous fury that comes from 50 years of accumulated battles. Whoopi Goldberg, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, tried one more time to assert authority. "Okay, that's enough. We need to keep this civil." Cher whirled on her, and the look in her eyes made Whoopi physically lean back in her chair. "Civil? Where was the civility when you were spreading rumors about my personal life? Where was the civility when you questioned my business dealings without a shred of evidence? You want to play dirty, but you can't handle it when someone fights back. The hypocrisy is staggering. Joy, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment, made one final attempt to turn the tables. Maybe this is exactly why people are questioning your stability. This kind of outburst doesn't exactly scream legendary icon. It screams diva who can't handle criticism. The words landed like a declaration of war. The studio fell into absolute silence, every person holding their breath, waiting to see how Cher would respond to this ultimate provocation. Questioning someone's mental stability, it was the nuclear option, the final attempt to discredit and dismiss. Cher stood perfectly still for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then she moved, stepping closer to the desk, her presence filling the space like a force of nature. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that's more terrifying than any shout. My stability. Each word was enunciated with perfect, deadly precision. Now you want to question my mental stability. I've survived blacklisting. I've survived death threats. I've survived industry sexism that tried to end my career a dozen times. I've survived decades of people trying to silence me, discredit me, destroy me, and you think your little mean girls club is going to break me? Sunani host, perhaps emboldened by Joy's attack, or perhaps simply too committed to retreat, made the single most catastrophic mistake of the entire confrontation. Well, given your history of dramatic relationships and public controversies, it's not exactly unreasonable to question. Stop right. Cher's voice cracked through the studio like thunder, so loud and commanding that several people literally jumped. The sound engineer's hand slipped on the board. A camera operator took an involuntary step backward. In the control room, a producer dropped their coffee. Don't you dare. Cher's voice shook with rage that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the building. Don't you dare bring my relationships into this. Don't you dare pretend my personal life is fair game for your ratings. Grab. You want to question my stability? Let me tell you what's actually unreasonable. She was magnificent in her fury, a legendary performer giving the performance of her lifetime. Except this wasn't a performance. This was raw, unfiltered truth exploding into the open. What's unreasonable is a group of women who claim to champion female empowerment, spending their time tearing down other women for sport. What's unreasonable is pretending this is journalism when it's nothing but glorified gossip disguised as news. What's unreasonable is thinking you can gang up on me 5-1 and I'll just sit here and take it like some meek little victim. Anna tried once more, her voice wavering. Cher, we understand you're upset, but attacking us personally isn't going to attacking you personally. Cher's voice reached a crescendo that reverberated through every corner of the studio. You just spent 15 minutes attacking everything about me personally, my relevance, my integrity, my relationships, my stability, and now you want to play the victim. The hypocrisy is absolutely breathtaking. The hosts were in full panic mode now. This had gone far beyond anything they had planned or imagined. They could see their careers, their credibility, potentially their entire show going up in flames, broadcast live to millions of viewers. Sarah had tears forming in her eyes. Sunny looked pale, almost green. Anna sat frozen like a deer in headlights. Joy made one desperate final attempt to redirect. Look, we're sorry if you feel if I feel. Cher's laugh was harsh and bitter. There's no if about it. You ambushed me with lies and innuendo. You questioned my character without evidence. And now you're gaslighting me by pretending it's all in my head. I know exactly what you did. America knows exactly what you did. And history will remember exactly what you did. Whoopee, realizing with absolute clarity that this situation was spiraling completely out of control, tried to assert authority one last time. Cher, I'm gonna have to ask you to lower your voice. This behavior is you're going to ask me. The disbelief in Cher's voice was palpable. You're gonna ask me to lower my voice after you raised yours to attack me. After you all ganged up on me like vultures circling a wounded animal. The audacity is absolutely breathtaking. Sarah, tears now streaming down her face from the sheer stress of the situation, made one last desperate plea. We never meant for this to get so heated. We were just trying to have a conversation about a conversation. Cher's voice was so powerful that sound engineers later reported they had never seen audio levels spike so high. This wasn't a conversation. This was a coordinated character assassination designed to humiliate me on national television. And you know the saddest part? You probably thought I'd just sit here and take it. You thought you could bully me into silence like you've probably bullied dozens of other guests. The confrontation had reached its absolute peak. Cher stood like an avenging angel, magnificent in her righteous fury, facing down 5 women who had clearly catastrophically underestimated who they were dealing with. The air in the studio was so charged with tension it felt like reality itself might crack. Anna, realizing that retreat was no longer possible and perhaps feeling she had nothing left to lose, made one final stand. Well, if you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Maybe you should just retire. And the words had barely left her mouth before Cher erupted with a fury that made everything before it seemed like a gentle warm-up. Can't handle tough questions. Cher's voice exploded like a volcano, shaking the very foundations of the studio. Tough questions. You call spreading malicious lies and manufacturing drama tough questions. You wouldn't know a tough question if it slapped you across your surgically enhanced faces. The brutality of the insult was shocking. The raw, unfiltered rage was unprecedented. This was no longer a celebrity trying to maintain dignity. This was a warrior who had been pushed beyond her limits and was now fighting with absolutely everything she had. The host recoiled as if physically struck. Joy's mouth fell open. Whoopi's eyes went wide with shock. Sunny made a small sound of distress. Sarah was openly weeping now. Anna looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The legendary power of Cher's voice, honed by decades of commanding audiences in stadiums and arenas around the world, filled every corner of the studio, overwhelming the microphones, the sound system, everything. Camera operators stepped back instinctively, some later reporting they felt physically pushed by the force of her presence. Producers in the control room sat in stunned, horrified silence, watching history unfold. Joy, her face crimson with a mixture of anger, humiliation, and genuine fear, made the fatal mistake of trying to match Cher's intensity. "Don't you dare talk to us like that. We've been doing this show for years. We have every right to years." Cher's laugh was terrifying in its intensity, somehow conveying both rage and contempt in a single sound. "You've been doing this show for years. I've been in this business longer than all of you combined. I was breaking barriers and changing the world while you were still learning how to read cards without moving your lips." Whoopi stood from her chair, perhaps thinking her physical presence would help establish some control. It was a disastrous miscalculation that would be replayed and analyzed countless times in the days to come. Cher turned on her with the full force of her legendary presence, and Whoopi actually took a step backward. "Sit your ass back down, Whoopi." The words were delivered with such commanding authority that Whoopi found herself obeying before her conscious mind could process the instruction. "You, of all people, should know better. You're supposed to be the voice of reason on this show, but instead you're just another cog in their mean girl machine. You should be ashamed of yourself." The studio descended into absolute chaos. Security personnel shifted nervously, hands moving to their radios, unsure if they should intervene in what had become the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history. The studio audience sat transfixed, some horrified, some thrilled, all completely unable to look away. Camera operators continued filming, their professional instincts overriding any personal discomfort, knowing they were documenting something that would be discussed for years. Sunny, tears streaming down her face, made one last desperate attempt at de-escalation. "Cher, please, we can work this out. We can talk about this like adults, and we don't have to work anything out." Cher's voice reached a pitch and intensity that threatened to blow out the sound equipment entirely. "There's nothing to work out. You showed me exactly who you are the moment I walked through that door. You're nothing but vultures, feeding on other people's pain and misery for your pathetic ratings." Sarah was sobbing openly now, the stress and tension completely overwhelming her. Anna sat pale and frozen, the co-host, who had delivered some of the most cutting remarks, now looking like she desperately wanted to be anywhere else. Joy's face showed a mixture of defiance and dawning horror as she realized the magnitude of what they had unleashed. "You want to know what tough questions actually look like?" Cher continued, her voice carrying the weight of 50 years of accumulated rage and truth. "Here's a tough question. How do you sleep at night knowing you make your living destroying other women? Here's another. What kind of example are you setting for young girls who watch this show and learn that the way to succeed is to tear others down?" Joy tried to interrupt, opening her mouth to speak, but Cher silenced her with a single look, a gaze so intense and commanding that Joy's words died in her throat. "I'm not finished." The words echoed through the studio like gunshots, final and absolute. "You think because you sit behind that desk with your fake smiles and coordinated attacks that you're untouchable. You think you can ambush me and I'll just sit here and take it like some washed up has been grateful for the attention." Cher moved closer to the desk and the hosts involuntarily shrank back, as if facing a tidal wave. Her presence was overwhelming, commanding the presence of someone who had stood on the world's biggest stages and owned every single one of them. "Let me tell you something about washed up has-beens." Cher's voice dropped to a deadly quiet that was somehow more powerful than her shouts. "I've sold over 100 million records worldwide. I've won every major award in entertainment, Oscar, Grammy, Emmy, Tony. I've used my platform to fight for civil rights when it was dangerous. I fought for LGBTQ equality when it cost me money and safety. I've spoken truth to power when power could actually destroy lives and careers." She paused, letting each accomplishment land like a hammer blow. "What have you done?" The question hung in the air unanswerable. What have you done besides tear down women who are better than you? What legacy are you building besides cruelty disguised as journalism? The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Even the crew had stopped moving, every person in the studio transfixed by the raw power of Cher's words. The legendary performer stood there, stripping away every pretense, every excuse, exposing the truth beneath the view's polished surface. Whoopi made one last desperate attempt to salvage something. "Anything. Cher, I think we should take a break. And you don't get to think anything." Cher cut in, her voice deadly quiet and more terrifying than any shout. "You've done enough thinking for one day, and look where it got us. Look at what you've created here." She turned away from the hosts and looked directly into the main camera, addressing the audience at home with perfect clarity and devastating honesty. "To everyone watching right now, this is what happens when fake journalism meets real integrity. This is what happens when mediocrity tries to tear down excellence. This is what happens when people who've never built anything try to destroy someone who spent 50 years creating art and fighting for justice. The camera captured every nuance of her expression, the fury, yes, but also the hurt, the disappointment, the bone-deep exhaustion of fighting the same battles decade after decade. And this, she gestured toward the cowering hosts with a sweep of her hand. This is what cowardice looks like when it's finally called out, when it's finally forced to face consequences instead of hiding behind cameras and corporate backing. Cher gathered her belongings with deliberate, dignified movements, despite the chaos swirling around her. She collected her purse, smoothed her jacket, every gesture radiating controlled power and absolute self-possession. She was leaving, but she was leaving on her terms, in her time, with her dignity not just intact, but enhanced. You know the real difference between me and all of you. She paused, making eye contact with each host in turn, ensuring they would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. I've never had to destroy another woman to feel good about myself. I've never had to spread lies and rumors to stay relevant. I've never had to hide behind a desk and gang up on someone to feel powerful. I built my career on talent, hard work, and integrity. What did you build yours on? The question was rhetorical, damning, unanswerable. Anna, perhaps in one final desperate attempt to salvage something, or perhaps simply unable to accept defeat, called out, "Sure, wait." You can't just wait for what? Cher's voice cut through like a blade. Wait so you can pretend this didn't happen. Wait so you can spin this into something it wasn't. Wait so you can gaslight me and your audience into thinking this was all some misunderstanding. The damage is done, Anna. You've shown the world exactly who you are. All of you have. She stood at the edge of the set, framed perfectly by the studio lights, every inch the icon she had been for 5 decades. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. One woman standing tall, dignified, powerful versus 5 women hunched behind their desk, looking small and diminished. I've survived 5 decades in this business by being authentic, Cher said, her voice ringing with absolute truth. By standing up for what I believe in, by never letting bullies silence me, no matter how powerful they think they are. You tried to break me today. You tried to humiliate me, to discredit me, to destroy my reputation on national television. She paused and a small, fierce smile crossed her face. But all you did was remind me and remind the world why I've never backed down from a fight, why I've never let people like you win, and why I never will. With that declaration hanging in the air like a battle flag, Cher turned and walked toward the exit. Her head was held high. Her shoulders were back. Every step radiated dignity and power. Behind her, the hosts sat in stunned, devastated silence, their carefully orchestrated ambush having backfired so spectacularly that they couldn't even begin to process it. At the door, Cher paused. She turned back one final time, and the camera caught her expression perfectly. Not triumphant, not cruel, but absolutely certain of her moral authority. "Good luck explaining this to your viewers," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Good luck explaining how you turned what should have been a celebration of a woman's life and career into a character assassination attempt. And good luck living with yourselves, knowing that millions of people just watched you reveal who you really are." The door closed behind her with a decisive click that seemed to reverberate through the entire studio. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the aftermath, the hosts' shocked faces, the toxic atmosphere they had created and now had to sit in. The studio audience's stunned silence. No one seemed to know what to do, how to proceed, how to recover from what had just happened. In the control room, producers frantically debated whether to cut to commercial, how to salvage the rest of the show, how to handle what was certainly about to become a massive public relations crisis. On set, the 5 hosts of The View sat frozen, each processing in their own way the magnitude of what had just occurred. What had begun as a routine celebrity interview had transformed into a masterclass in legendary status. Cher had walked into their trap and turned it into their nightmare. She had faced down 5 hostile opponents on their own turf and emerged not just victorious, but enhanced, her integrity proven, her power demonstrated, her legendary status reinforced in the most dramatic way possible. The View would have to face the consequences of their coordinated attack. They would have to answer to their network, their sponsors, and most importantly, their viewers. They had tried to diminish a legend and instead had given her the perfect platform to remind the world exactly why she was legendary in the first place. Cher walked out of that studio with her head held high, her dignity intact, and her place in entertainment history more secure than ever. And The View was left to sit in the wreckage of their own creation, knowing that this moment would define them far more than it would ever define her. What started as an ambush became a reckoning. What was meant to be a takedown became a triumph, and what The View hosts thought would be their viral moment became Cher's greatest victory. The legend had spoken. The world had listened.